Welcome to the Enduring Church Podcast, hosted by Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis, helping pastors grow their churches while equipping the body to love their neighbors. Yeah, their literal neighbors. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Enduring Church Podcast. It is exciting. I am excited to be here. I am Michael Davis.
It is Nathan. I am Nathan. Sorry.
No, you don't need to apologize at all. I mean, looking at your eye, it looks like you got into a fist fight this week.
No, that's just what a week of a marriage intensive that I was facilitating. I've got a great marriage. I wasn't attending. I was one of the counselors, but put in a lot of work, I guess.
Or just a lot of crying and just really
Honestly.
dealing with a lot of emotions. I've never cried so hard that I busted a blood vessel in my eye before, but
well, me and Jesus.
Yeah, no, you're right. Wow. Okay. Well, I guess I have a lot of sanctification to go through. Thank you for checking out the Enduring Church Podcast on YouTube. If you could do us a favor, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to make sure that you're aware whenever a new episode drops. Also, if you got some time, give us a thumbs up and also leave a comment. Really helps us with the algorithm. Well, now back to the show.
I'm a little uncomfortable that I just said that, so...
Well, we're all going to have to give an account one day, and I'm pretty sure that will be one of the things that you have to talk about. Well, if that's the worst, I think that you're going to be fine. And
look, y'all, it can only go up from the intro.
That's right. That's right. Well, actually, we're joking around, but we have a pretty meaty subject to talk about today. It is growing your church while trying to stay faithful to the gospel. We have a lot of thoughts. I think personally, we're probably going to disagree about certain things. I'm sure some of you guys will, if for the ones and ones of you who are listening to us, maybe one of you guys
dozens,
maybe dozens. Man, this is
one day.
Keep it positive. But the truth is that there's going to be a lot of disagreement on this. I think from my perspective, I just want to make sure that everyone understands, and you, Nathan, as well, that we're just trying to work through this stuff, and we know that we don't have all the answers and opinions, right? So, but let's get started. I want to ask this first question for you because you're in the thick of it, right? You have a growing church, and you're trying to bring people in because you want to grow your community, you want to love people well. But how would you say, for you personally, how can churches stay focused on the true gospel of Christ while seeking to grow?
Wow. This is the tension that every pastor, every preacher is facing. Let's be honest. It's way more fun speaking to a full room than a half full room.
Yeah.
I would almost rather speak to an empty room than a half full room. So just getting the humanity out there, right? Because when you walk into a movie theater and it's empty, you have two emotions, right? One emotion's like, sweet, I've got this whole thing to myself. And then you're like, wait, does somebody know something about this movie that I don't? Is this not a good movie? And so, it's that kind of that psychology of critical mass and more energy in a room and all the things that we think about when we're creating, our services and whatnot. So yeah, we want to be full and we want to grow, but I think we all can maybe even recognize some of the ways that we've maybe cut corners to grow. And so I'm not here to stand in judgment and join in with the blogger crowd that loves to say that, mega churches water down the gospel. But yeah. I just want to just recognize and just try to have a posture of, charity towards this. Like, this is a tension. Right. And I think more often than not, we need to place ourselves right in the middle of that tension and just seek wisdom. So the question you asked, though, staying focused on the true gospel. And I love that you wrote true gospel. And I don't know, maybe this will be our first point of disagreement. Maybe it's a point of agreement. But I just think the true gospel is not what is being preached.
Yeah.
I'll say a true gospel, but maybe a half gospel. So Jesus was preaching the gospel, and I'm going to try to do this without being a preacher. So I'm going to keep it tight. When Jesus was going around it was said that he was preaching the gospel. And when he sent out his 12, he said they were preaching the gospel. And he sent out 72, they were preaching the gospel. Well, most altar calls and crusades and youth camp, invitations, we present the gospel, and it's usually Romans Road, and it all relates to salvation. I love that. I want to be in heaven. I want you to be in heaven. But, that's all kind of talking about what Jesus did on Easter weekend, right? The death, the burial, the resurrection. So for the 3 years leading up to that, how was Jesus preaching that gospel if he had yet to do those things? So he was preaching the gospel of the kingdom, good news for the poor, the removal of evil, the removal of evil spirits, freedom for the oppressed. The kingdom is near, right? So I just think we've got to figure out how to preach a good news that, here's kind of my preacher Twitter line. Then I'll shut up for a second. It can't just be about peace for the afterlife, but purpose for this life. And so I think we've got to figure out how to get back to preaching the gospel that Jesus preached, because it grew, right? Crowds came, crowds wanted to see the gospel in action. Crowds wanted to see people's today lives being impacted, not just their eternal lives being impacted.
Yeah. I think that a huge problem that a lot of large churches face is that they're trying to mix pragmatism with evangelism. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad thing in regards to trying to be a church that's welcoming to those who maybe aren't churched, or trying to be a place that's comfortable. Problem is, and you actually alluded to this, they crucified Jesus for his gospel. You have to tell people that they're lost in order for them to be saved. You have to tell your church, even those who are believers, that they're not good enough, that they need Jesus, and that they're falling short, just like you are falling short, and I'm falling short. And the problem is that when you're trying to do that in a way that is not necessarily offensive to those who are perishing. Again, I've read the Bible several times, and I haven't read any of that in there. It's, again, 1 Corinthians 2:14. You have to have the Spirit to discern the things of the Spirit. But importantly, for those who the Spirit is calling, it's going to make sense. Problem is a lot of folks are thinking, maybe we do large shows and sing secular songs and have blue lights and fog machines, and then that's going to be bringing people into our church. Problem is that that's not the way that Acts defines the church. It's not the way that Paul writes about the church. And I think that for a lot of folks, it's very easy to get large numbers when you are creating a really nice production, but that is not a house of, a body of believers who are living in community, who are loving their community around them. It's just, it feels, again, I'm not reading that in Acts. And there is a saying, right? What you win them with is what you win them to. And I'm just, again, I am not, I came to faith in a large megachurch, which shall remain nameless. It wasn't the event. I shouldn't say that. Sorry. It wasn't the sermon. I'm going to get myself in trouble already. It wasn't the sermon. It was a community group that was attached to it. So when I was a non-believer, I had no desire to go see, a professional group of musicians playing and a motivational talk. I didn't need it. What led me to Jesus through that church wasn't the church. It was the community group, which, again, I'm not saying is a bad thing. It's, in a sense, it's almost like a house church model. But I, as a non-believer, even that stuff wasn't compelling to me.
Yeah. And I was a worship pastor at one point, and I've covered U2, I've covered, classic rock, I've covered Michael Jackson. I've done that all on Sunday mornings, and
yeah,
and so for me, I'm not even necessarily saying that shouldn't be a part of your tool belt. I mean, you see Paul quoting a lot of secular philosophers and plays. Sure. When Paul was at in Athens and did his whole thing to the unknown God, he didn't use scripture at all to be evangelistic, but that wasn't church. That was him out, in the
That's
community.
evangelism. And
Right,
that
right.
you hit the nail on the head. There are churches out there, again, I'm not going to say names. There are churches out there which are doing phenomenal evangelism, but they are not church. And that's the difference. So that actually leads me into the question, because this is important. What do you think are the key differences between numerical growth and spiritual growth within a church?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first thing I would say is I don't. I heard somebody one time talk about false dichotomies. So,
Oh,
I
fair, fair,
yep,
fair, fair.
yep. So I like to just, again, we want to sit in the tension. You know,
Yeah,
I think they are two separate categories, but they do have some overlap.
yeah,
And the overlap to me is spiritual growth. Hopefully, will result in numerical growth. Right.
yeah,
I feel like it's hard to get close to Jesus and not be burdened for those who don't know Jesus. So I
yeah,
think the closer you get to Jesus, the more you're going to be like, okay, I'm gonna tear the roof off and lower my friends into the presence of Jesus. So I do like to think that they come hand in hand, but different strategies and different conversations. You use different measurables, and I mean, I just remember one time I was with some of the various roles I had. I was over small groups and had, you know, probably 700 people in small groups, and so it was great from all the metrics. That was about half of our weekend attendance, and so all the consultants would be like, "You have a healthy church." Then we started doing some like auditing and found out that like our small groups, which we did all the language to promote it. This is how you make a big church feel small. This is how you know who've got your back. This is how you can, and hopefully, you'll go deeper in the word too. And
yeah,
so when we started auditing them and even looking at my own small group, it was like this was community. It wasn't Bible study. And
yeah,
so when we even started raising the biblical expectations on what it means to be a spiritual leader, there was a lot of like whiplash, like, oh, I thought we were a grace church. I didn't know that I can't be sleeping with my, cohabitation. So I was like, oh, I realized at that moment I was good at numerical growth, not good at spiritual growth. We were good at promoting discipleship. We were better at promoting discipleship than actual discipleship. So
yeah,
that's one of the downfalls of those two things being, evaluated, evaluated just in the overlap. So looking at it from like numerical growth. Healthy things grow, hopefully. Unhealthy things grow too. Weeds grow and grass
yeah,
grows. So I think we can't just use those anecdotal things and just be like, well, if we're growing, it's because we're healthy. I think you have to look at the actual seeds that you're planting. And that's where I get back to question number one. Is it the true gospel? Is it
yeah,
the true gospel? It's got to be more than just my ticket to heaven. It's got to be about life change for today. And then Jesus has a lot to say about, we know true followers by their fruits of the spirit. So I think that's one of the things on spiritual growth. And then hopefully the way that, domino effects into numerical growth is just having a heart for evangelism, a heart for the lost, a heart for bringing people into God's presence. But I will say this, I tell our church, inviting your friends outside of church to church is not evangelism.
yeah.
It's maybe evangelistic, but it's not evangelism. I tell people I'd rather you invite them to your house before you invite them to our church. You know,
Preach. That is awesome. Not that I'm very good at that, but yes, no, well, we said this in the last episode. You can't outsource, your responsibility as a Christ follower and as a son or daughter of God. There's certain expectations. Again, your salvation doesn't count on it, but I think this actually leads into kind of a follow-on question that there are a ton of faithful pastors out there with smaller churches that are doing things right, and they're trying to be as faithful as possible, and are not seeing the growth that they're wanting. You've been a part of massive churches, and then you started a church plant, and now it's a very healthy, I would say, mid-sized church. What do you think? And I've noticed that you're definitely, you're preaching the gospel. Some of your sermon series seem like they cut, which is awesome. But what do you think? Maybe some encouragement, or maybe even some of the things that you've experienced and you've done to help stay faithful, still preaching the Bible and the true gospel. Um, and how do you stay, enthusiastic? Let's say that's the word, when things are not necessarily growing to your liking.
Yeah. So, great question. We've seen slow and steady growth, which has been cool. But in the slow and steady, if you're just following the week to week trends, you start thinking, oh, is it a plateau? Are we going backwards? Well,
Yeah.
and a lot of times when you're in a smaller church, you notice who's not there, and you start thinking, oh, did I do something wrong? Or I think that's kind of the people pleasing instinct that I have. I know there's a total opposite reflex where it's like, you almost wear it as a badge of honor. It's like, well, they're not coming because I'm preaching the truth, or I did. So I don't
Yeah,
know that
you're right. I've seen that too. I have.
so I don't know if either one of those are healthy reactions. For me, I just got to a place where um, we we are in the obedience business.
Yeah.
We are in the faithfulness business. We are not in the growth business. When I look at Paul coming in hot in First Corinthians, right? Like that wasn't a fun letter to receive if you're in the Corinthian church.
No,
Because at
no.
first he's like, okay, so you're trying to like, get excited about who's loyal to Apollos and who's loyal to Cephas or Peter and who's loyal to me. And he's like, doesn't matter. Like some plant, some water, God gives the growth. And so
Yeah.
I think just having a healthy reminder, no matter where you are in a season of growth, decline, stuck, or whatever, um, we are in the input business. God's in the output business. So I think we just have to remember, like, stay faithful. This isn't permission just to like, phone it in. This isn't permission. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. Like, I do
Yeah.
think excellence giving, like Psalm 33, sing skillfully before the Lord. So there's nuance, there's subtlety to all this, but I think we trust God with our obedience, and we also trust God with our growth. So I'm going to disciple, I'm going to equip, I'm going to shepherd, I'm going to faithfully teach, and then there's a lot of other pragmatic things that we need people like you in the marketing
Yeah.
world to help us figure out, how do we show up in a way that is maybe enticing, or at least sparks a curiosity of outsiders.
It's interesting because, again, part of my business is trying to get people to come to churches who are looking to do like that type of digital outreach. But one of the things I tell them is that you need to tell people who you are and what you are about, because you don't want everyone to come. You want people who are seeking the Lord. You want people who are going to contribute. You want people who are going to be not a burden, because listen, every pastor on here understands that about, you've got about 2 or 3 people in your church that consume probably about 30% of your time. So you don't necessarily want to make those 5% of your church consuming 100% of your time. So it is about not just in the experience within the church, but it is even how you present yourself online or through your social channels or through everything like that. But I think you said something, and I think, and we've said it since the beginning. As long as you're faithful, and as long as you're you not performing, that sounds awful. As long as you are doing church yourself and your welcome team and your assistant pastors and your staff and everyone who is your volunteers, there's a commitment to excellence and to loving well. I don't think it's possible to not see growth. I've seen it's interesting, especially in the Reformed Baptist movement, and also even some of the more again, some of the younger churches, but the hipster folks who are doing all old school stuff, right? Communion every single week. Like, I think my old church, we went through Matthew. I think it took us about 2.5 years. The stuff that people are saying don't do, and that church was seeing massive growth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it really is about your community and what your community wants. And that's another thing I tell churches: your community is not the same as Nathan's community, and your church is not going to be the same as Nathan's church. Those who God has put in your area, the ones that you are responsible for, are going to look different. They're going to speak different. They're going to have different expectations. Frankly, they're going to have a different understanding of the gospel and of the Bible. Um, some of them, some communities are going to be awash in cultural Christianity, which we can talk about in potentially
Oof.
later episodes, which could be even more difficult for a faithful pastor. So you can't. That's one of the things I try to explain to pastors. There's no one size fits all approach.
Right.
You genuinely need to speak to your community in order to tell them to have, well, just like any product, if you sell them something that's not you, they are going to feel like they got duped,
Yeah.
and that is a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole illustration of being fishers of men.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to know what type of fish live in that pond, and what type of bait will work. And so I would love to carve out a little, and I'm pretty sure you have a question about some practical strategies come up in a second. So I can give some credit to some things that have benefited us from at local church, from just our relationship with you, and just practical conversations about how to show up in people's Google and whatnot. But
Yeah.
you've pinged on this idea several times of what you win them with is what you win them to.
Yeah.
And I just have a quick reflection on that.
Yeah.
And it gets back to me, like, gospel of salvation, gospel of the kingdom. It's not either or, it's both and. But we do hear a lot of pastors kind of complaining about the consumerism nature of a lot of their congregations.
Yeah, we got
And
an episode planned for that one in a little
okay,
while.
well then I'll save it, but I'll just give you just a little thought.
Yeah.
If we're only preaching the gospel of salvation, then we are only answering the question, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
And so it's like, what we win them with is what we win them to.
Yeah.
If we're not teaching a gospel of transformation, the gospel of the kingdom, we can't just limit the gospel to answer what's in it for me. We have to allow the gospel to answer the question, who has God called me to be? What is my identity in him? What is my believing loyalty? How does that transform my life? So again, what we win them with is what we win them to. So as we're talking about that growth conversation, I still think, let's talk tactics, let's talk strategy, let's talk, all those things. But let's also just remember, like, we have got to, if we want to see our people engage, if we want to see our people mobilized and sent out to share the gospel and grow the church, right? Then I think we may need to look upstream and think, well, how did we even get these first people in the door anyways? Was it just the whole fire insurance strategy? If that's the case, then I don't think we should be upset or disappointed in them if if the front door was just, hey, here's the free ride to heaven. And so yeah, I think transformation, like a transformed soul, is going to be one of the best marketing engines for your church, which we can circle back to in a little bit.
No, for sure. And I people have been listening to for over 22 minutes. I do want to get some practical stuff. But I don't want people to think that what we're doing here is judging the people in your church, or even the way that you're preaching the gospel. The truth is, we don't know your church. We don't know, what your difficulties are, what your challenges are. But what we're saying is that when the Spirit is prompting, again, both believers and unbelievers, and you guys maybe can tell my theology on this stuff, and I'm sure that Nathan and I will get into it. The truth is, the truth of the gospel will sing. It will be bright. It will have an aroma that will draw people to it. But here's the thing that should provide some comfort in those who are faithfully doing everything that you just said and are not necessarily seeing the rapid growth they're hoping for, is for those who are perishing, it is foolishness. It is Jesus was crucified for this. You are not going to make the gospel, again, because it's not just fire insurance. It's about life change. It's about transformation. It's about admitting that you're a sinner and you need someone to pay the penalty for your sin. But if you're doing that for those who are perishing, they're not going to find that compelling. And if they are finding compelling what you're doing, then that should provide some maybe some discomfort, because at the end of the day, even though someone might not have said that they believe, when the Spirit is working in the heart of an unbeliever and they are being exposed to the glories of Jesus and what he did for them, it will make sense. But again, I'm going to talk about 1 Corinthians 2:14. For you need the Spirit to be able to discern the things of the Spirit, because they're spiritually discerned. External to that, it's not going to make any sense.
Yeah, yeah. So Jesus, again, Timmy, I'm going to go both and, not either
Yes.
or,
Yeah.
because you do see a response to conviction of sin in the woman at the well, where there was gratitude. When she went and told the village, the Samaritans, she didn't say, "You got to see the Messiah. You
Yeah.
got to see the miracles he did. You got to see," like, she wasn't talking about the positive aspects of that
No, no,
interaction.
no, no, no.
He
Yeah.
told me everything I ever did. So yes, the gospel, the good news is offensive to those who are perishing. But, I do think there are moments where people are like, oh my gosh, like, conviction is actually an act of kindness, because conviction is not condemnation,
I think conviction is an act of the Spirit, but we can.
So yeah, it's an act of the Spirit, but it's
Yeah.
it's the kindness of the Spirit
No,
that
for
would
sure.
show us our need
100%.
for him. And I just think it's worth noting that, one of the first evangelists was this Samaritan adulterous woman.
Yeah.
And
Praise God.
and it was like, he told me everything I ever did. Like, that was her
Yeah.
sales pitch to come see Jesus. He
Yeah.
told me about my sin. So yeah, it's this, we got to hold room for all these nuances,
No,
as we
for
think about
sure,
these
for
things.
sure, and that should make us feel very good, because for the person likely with the worst reputation in the entire village is the one that was sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with her neighbors.
I'm
I
sure
think we
the
can. I think we can do it. I think we
I'm sure
can
the
do it.
apostles were like, I mean, it's cool, Jesus, but is she who we want posting about our church on social media?
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. Wow. Okay. So in the last several minutes here, I really do want to talk about practical strategies. You've been there, done that, again, from very large to brand new, startup church plant. What would you say are maybe the top few things that when your aha moments, like, I'm doing this and it's making a huge difference?
Yeah, yep. So, the past year, we have, we get to really connect with a lot of first time guests. And I don't know, like, this is the first time in many years in ministry where I feel like first time guests have been willing to identify themselves outside of checking a kid in. Like, that's usually the only data you get how to follow up with a new household, is when they have to give you their information to put their kid in the kids ministry. But we've just been really pushing it hard and making ourselves available in the lobby and da 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 da. And so, I just try to ask this all the time, every Sunday. So this is anecdotal, it's not empirical data, but without fail, what I keep hearing is not "I was invited" or whatever. It was, "I found you guys online." And that started happening when you helped me realize how much more effective an SEO Google business profile strategy would be. I mean, we were very diligent on social media. We were running ads, and it was good. Like, I still think our Instagram and Facebook are we get great engagement. But I've seen a significant uptick of first time guests when we realized, SEO over social media. So I would say that's more important. But again, both matter, because the SEO is how you kind of show up in people's inquiries. But the social media is like, okay, they get an idea of like what you're like before they show up. So I think both of those really matter. Another thing that I think has been really helpful for us.
I do before you go in, I do want to say I did not pay him to say that.
No,
But I do want to expand on one thing that
yeah,
you said, is it is about presenting yourself authentically. And that's fundamentally the biggest difference between doing this well in where it reflects the heart of your church, and also just doing it tactically. And that's the difference. Your social reflects who you are. And again, the vast majority, I think the statistic I saw was 80% of people who visited churches research that church prior to going there, even if they're invited. So it's just SEO. It's not just, good email. It's not just paid ads. It's not all the lead capture, all this stuff, these tactics. It's about authentically representing who you are. And I think when you do that, you have a really, really good opportunity for people to come. because it's not just about seeing an ad and going, like most normal people say, oh, they're close, I'm just going to go. Maybe for people who are out of town and just looking for a church to visit, that's one thing. But if someone's actively looking for a church to join, they're going to want to see a lot of different things about you. And again, it's not just your website. It's not just your online, your local search citations. It's not just your social profiles or all the other things. It's a totality of it, just like you care about how you present yourself when people come in. I know that so many pastors are obsessed with making sure that the welcome team is super trained and that they understand what to say and what not to say, what we're trying to get people to do. All that stuff is oftentimes really well thought out. And it's true for church plants and it's true for large churches. But a lot of people don't think about the other things about what happens prior to that. Again, and I'm going to say it again. I did not tell Nathan to say that. This was totally unsolicited. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like it's been helpful. So why would I not talk about
That's
it? Right?
Awesome.
So let me just say something to, my listener friend on the other end of this, that is a pastor. Maybe you don't have a big staff, or maybe you do have a big staff. Imposter syndrome is not a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And you don't have to be an expert marketer. You don't have to be an expert designer. You don't have to be an expert copywriter. But so often we tend to tell ourselves that we do. And what ends up happening a lot on social media is we are presenting the church the pastor would want to attend, not necessarily the church that the community needs. So I just like, humility is such an attractive quality. Don't fake it till you make it. Be a networker, find people, ask questions, you don't have to be an expert. And so for me, finding Michael and learning about things was just so relieving to not have to white knuckle social media and post and all these things. Like do a messaging exercise, like get to know, like, what is the ethos of your church and how do we communicate that in concise ways? So I would say before you start doing, do we do 2 videos a week, or are we doing sermon clips? Or are we doing like, there's so many different hot takes on what frequency you should be posting and times a day and email news blast, and all that really matters. But do the hard work first of recognizing, I don't know what I don't know. There are people who do. And your spiritual gift in some ways should be, I know a guy or I know a girl, right?
You hit the nail on the head here. And a lot of churches don't do this, and they really should, especially when it comes to this type of outreach. And hear me out. This is not just marketing, quote unquote. This is just people who are gifted in inviting people, loving people well. There are people in your church right now, no matter how small, well, maybe not no matter how small, but generally, even in the smaller churches, that have the capacity to do a lot when it comes to helping your church grow. People who can write, people who can do video, people who are really good at interviewing people who are really good at just having, cooking a meal and inviting neighbors who are totally comfortable with that. I am not, but there are people who really genuinely enjoy inviting people over and hosting folks. But it's understanding that it's not all on you, pastor. It is about it's about your body. But this is the question you have to ask yourself. Does the body that you are shepherding, are they as committed to the growth of your church as you are? And if the answer is no, then that is on you to change that. But if you think that the growth and the health of your church is entirely on you, again, you're not reading Acts. Like, I'm going to say that in every single episode, because it's not all on you, pastor. You are to shepherd, you are to grow, you are to educate, you are to help people on their journey. But it is not on all you. It's not all you, because I think that, again, maybe you can tell me if this has been from your experience. How much of burnout that you've noticed has had something to do with people's expectation of what their church should be, rather than the reality of what their church is, and just being comfortable with that?
Yeah. I think in my case, it's almost always self-induced. Like, I think where I should be showing up and all the things that I could and should be doing, and just trying to have the wisdom about knowing the difference between can and should. I can do this, but should I do this? And we'll probably land the plane in a minute on this idea, but the number one job of church leadership, according to Ephesians 4, is to equip, equip, not
Amen.
do. So 2 other quick little simple things. Won't spend a lot of time on it, but just before we wrap up, this is where I'm going to show a little bit of love to our non-denom attractional, mega church model.
Yeah.
One of the things I appreciate from my time in those circles is I think your Sunday morning, the things that you can control, like is it easy to find your way around? Is it warm? Is it welcoming? Is it excellent? It needs to be worth a newcomer's time, right?
Okay, fair. I'll give you that.
So I just think, like that. It doesn't need to be polished. It doesn't need to be ultra professional, right? But it just excellence should matter. But figuring out how to do that in a way that is, meekness, not flexing every muscle you've got. Doing that underneath the control and the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So I think when people show up, there's a million other things they could be doing these days, so just make it worth their time. But you don't only want to invite people to come and see. The church needs to be out there. So I say it's not just come and see, it's also go and be. So find out the nonprofits that really have the heartbeat of the community. Find out some, show up in those things. Now, they're not going to be major growth engines, but it's like, if all the church is doing is asking things of the community, come and see us without making any investments, that's not a very mutual relationship. So I think
that's huge.
Show up in the community. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to do every 5K. You don't have to sponsor every event. I know, Pastor, your inbox is full of people wanting you to do every golf tournament and all that type of stuff, but show up and not just you show up, but engage your church to show up in ways that are just investing with no strings attached in the community.
Yep, absolutely. And it's funny because I've had conversations with pastors from a marketing perspective of like, ooh, I should do, I should grill out with burgers, and there's a new apartment complex and we should do that. And I tell them this every single time they mention something like that. Are you doing this to try to get people to come to your church? Are you doing this because you want to love your community? And that is a question they have to ask yourselves. Like, because you will see growth, but if your intention, again, God knows the intentions of your heart, which is a terrifying thing at all times.
Yeah.
But again, and I've actually said this when I'm talking to my non-church clients, when it comes to like with ministry clients, I was like, what is the point? What is the purpose of what you're doing? What's the why? And if your why is not God honoring, the probability of it working is very, very low. Just love well. Love your church, love your community. And it's weird. And then be faithful. And it's weird how often I see it work.
God honors it, man. That's what we've seen, at least.
Absolutely. Well, we are, this was a little bit longer of an episode, but that's the beautiful thing about podcasts. We're not a TV show. So thank you guys so much for sticking with us. I know that there might have been certain things that we can disagree upon, but stay faithful, pastor and church leaders, and we appreciate you. I'm Michael Davis.
I'm Nathan Castleberry. Thanks for enduring our podcast.
Have a good one. This has been the Enduring Church Podcast with Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis. We'll see you next time.